Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Just to confirm, can you just anyone of you let me know if I'm audible?
Yes, you
Okay, thanks. So, thank you today for attending the session. Today, I'll be talking about like how to crack FAANG interviews, or in a sense, like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Uh, just to give a brief introduction of myself, I'm Samir. I'm currently working at Meta, or formerly known as Facebook, in London, as a software engineer. Before joining Meta or Facebook, I was working at Google in the search infrastructure team, where I was building the search engine and increasing the reliability of it. And before that, I was working at Amazon to calculate the shipping costs of all the products delivered by Amazon worldwide. Uh, Apart from work, I'm a avid cricket and Netflix fan. I like to watch series. I don't ever miss a match of cricket, Indian cricket team, and I'm also trying to follow up football, the World Cup. So just trying to get that also as my new hobby. And apart from that, I also like enjoy mentoring and teaching. So I mentor on different platforms, and I love to teach students during in my college days and even in other forms. So before we progress ahead, like this is what we are going to discuss today, and hopefully it would be helpful for you all. I'll be also having a Q&A session at the last, so feel free to have your questions there at the end of the session. Um so before we start, right, I just and this is not like a very, I'm not a PPT person, so just feel free to interact whenever you want. And so before we start, right, so you have heard FAANG, you have heard what it means. So I just want from you, like, why do you want to work in FAANG? Like, what is your motivation? Why do you think it's, why should work in a FAANG company? Maybe you can just type in a chat, or just unmute yourself and say it.
Hi, Samir. This is Akimbadi here. Um, yeah, I guess I'll speak for myself, but I think for most software engineers, it's almost kind of like that ultimate job to have when you get an opportunity to work with a fan company. You know, obviously, I'll be fooling myself if I also don't mention that apart from wanting to work with really smart people where I get to polish my arsenal, the perks, excuse me, the perks as well are quite attractive. Good pay. I guess in some places there's nice work-life balance. So it pretty much would make you, for the most part, a well-rounded person.
Got it.
Accomplished engineer and being able to work on fun things. So I guess, and a lot of innovation does happen within FAANG companies. I do know someone who works for Google, and I was made to understand that a lot of tools that are in the open source space or that are later released are many a times internal tools that have been used for years and years in Google. So you do find a lot of smart people putting together solutions that help make life much easier for the rest. So that's the reason why. So right, and allow other people to chime in.
Got it. Got it. So I think thanks a lot. That definitely makes sense. So like one of the reasons why, like again, I'll speak for myself or in general why I wanted to work in FANG, and like the real whether it was truly worth it. So some of the reasons, which were like, first was the, like, I've seen a definitely good high coding standards and design standards as well. The reason for it, like all the major companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, they operate at a huge scale. So you need a code which it executes perfectly in terms of scale. So that was one of the reasons. So that was a good learning, and that is the coding standards and the design standards for the same reason are high. Second, since as you said, like there's a lot of innovation going on, that is one of them. That is obviously going on in other companies as well, but in this in fine companies, generally what you say is like you understand the complete process, like right from the start, from where do ideas come and till the execution point of time. And third, as you said, like, so FANG actually, if you might know, comes from like it was derived for stocks, like best performing stocks. So generally you get a good like these companies are high performing companies as well, so you get a good compensation and perks. So that was a few reasons. So now, like, we know that what is FANG and why do we want to it. Another reason, which is like many, like I have a lot of friends who have worked in FANG companies and then they joined other startups as CTO and others, using their FANG experience, because they have seen like how do companies operate at scale, and they could just take that experience into new startups and build the startups from scratch. So that is another reason why people like to work in FAANG. I see a question from like just curious about the environment, how things get done inside FAANG. So Farooq, I'll definitely answer that. I have especially a slide for that. I'll just come to that at the end of the session. So moving ahead. So how should you, first question is, how should you prepare for it, right? Or irrespective whether you have a coding background or not, or let's say, if you have coded before or not. So how do you start before? How does the journey look like, right? So I say the preparation is a cycle of three things. It starts with learning, then you practice what you have learned, then you compete against your peers to see how good have you become, and again you go back to the first step is again of learning. So it's a continuous cycle, I believe, and that is what you improve upon yourself to get to where you want to get to. uh, Coming to specifically to learning part, right? So how do I start, or how do I start learning things? So uh, the first step is always picking up a language, and trust me, you can't go wrong with this. So you can pick C++, Python, Java, or any language, and it's just a language to get you started. You think, okay, like maybe I'll start with Python, go ahead. You think I'll start with some C sharp, go ahead, no worries. It's basically just a starting point. And some of the languages which programmers generally use, or the top programmers generally use, are C++, because it's fast. Generally, like in coding competitions, you need the execution speed, and that's why generally you don't get timeout errors. Python, second one, because it's very fast to write. You can write it quickly. You don't have to write long codes. And third is Java. So these are the top three languages which programmers generally use. But again, as I said, just you can just start with any language. Like for example, I started with C, then I moved to C++, and then I moved to Java. So that's the case. The second thing is, how where should I learn, right? Let's say I don't have any programming background. I have just started. I'm just in my college first year. So again, I would say choose a resource which suits you better, or which you look like. Like you can start reading from books. You can go to YouTube videos. I'll share the links later on in the additional resources. You can start with MRD courseware, or online courses like Coursera, LinkedIn, or even blogs on Geeks for Geeks, or even there are language blogs like cplus.com and others. So even in, like for example, in my case, I had started with a book called Later C, and then from that I moved to other resources. So my suggestion is, like, start from resources, any resources which gets you started. Let's say just search for C++ basic tutorial or Python basic tutorial, and then you can move ahead to, okay, maybe blogs is not working out for me, then I'll just start watching videos or something else. The second step, as I said, like, okay, you have started learning. So what should you learn initially? I think you should just only learn 5 or 6 things at the initial. What are the 5 or 6? First is syntax. Second is basic data structures like arrays, sets, maps, sorting. That's it. That is where I would suggest you stop and go to the next step of practicing. So the reason for that is because now you have initially got a hold of the language, you know the syntax and other basic things, and you start practicing. Like there are a lot of platforms on which you can practice. Some of the famous ones generally are like CodeChef, Codeforces, HackerRank, LeetCode. uh, if I want to go individually in each of them, is so Codeforces is and CodeChef are both are good for contests, like and practices as well. You can see the questions which they have from their previous contests or which people have added, and you can go through the questions. HackerRank is good for like topic wise practicing. Say that, hey, I want to practice this particular topic, just go on HackerRank, do it. LeetCode, it's very good. I would recommend for company in specific preparation. Like if you want to prepare only for, let's say, hey, I want to only prepare for interviews of Meta, that is one definitely good website if you want to just have, and that is quite accurate from what I've seen from my experience. So what will happen in this practice sessions, like once you start practicing, right, you'll come to know one thing, you'll definitely use what you have learned in the first step. But second thing you'll come to know is, let's you come across a problem which you are no idea how to solve. You will come across the solutions, and then you see, oh, okay, this problem maybe uses stacks, or okay, this problem uses queues, and I was not aware of it. So what will happen is, you'll go back again to this first step of learning more, and that is basically the cyclic process which I was talking about. So basically you'll come across things which you don't know, and then you'll start reading more about it, or just trying to understand what it is. Eventually what will happen is you'll come across these topics like binary search, DFS, breadth first, linked list, and matrix queues, etc. These are the common topics or common things which are generally asked in FAANG interviews. Like most of the interviews, like more than 90% of the interviews will be based on some of these topics. uh, you might see there's a question mark on dynamic programming. This is a question which a lot of people have asked me, like should I prepare dynamic programming interviews. The reason is generally the guidance in is like no more DP is no more asked, but some interviewers still ask it, but the chances are very rare. So it's up to you whether if you have a good amount of preparation time, you should definitely do it. If you think, oh, I'm currently on a tight schedule for my interviews, it's better if you then focus on other topics as well. I see a question here: is PHP still used in Meta? Yes, definitely. Does Meta look for PHP engineers? So one thing is all the FANG interviews are always language agnostic, most of them, unless it's a very specific role. So they will not say that you have to code only in this language or this language. You can choose any programming language of your choice, code it in the coding interviews, and you can. That is completely fine as long as there's no specific role. Like, say, let's say a hardware engineer who just needs some specific language or something like that. Okay, let's say you started preparing, you learned a lot, you practiced a lot, right? So the next step is the interviews, right? Why were you doing all of this? That was mostly for your interviews, right? So how do you get started with it, or how do you start actually doing it? The first step is a resume, a good resume, right? Because that is the first thing that you will use to apply for any of the roles on any of the companies. And uh, there's an interesting stat, like any recruiter, any person does not read a resume for more than 6 to 8 seconds. uh, so the reason for and that is why you should always create a one pager resume. That is what is the recommendation. Unfortunately, I'm still struggling with it, but that is a very, like, if you can make it a one pager, that's always a good thing. uh, I see there's a question like, do you have a link to the template? Yes, this is the link, and you can find it. I'll share the presentation link as well at the last. So the first thing is always have a good one pager resume. The second thing, any person or any interviewer or any manager who looks out for a resume is the impact. Like, what have you done in your previous company or current company? So always focus on the numbers. Like, for example, if you have built a tool to reduce time of some XYZ service or XYZ operation, say that it reduced the operation from 30% or 20%. Let's say if you launched a new product which is used by users, give a number like my new product is by used by, let's say, 1 million users or something like that. So what happens is those numbers show the scale or the impact which you're having at a current company. So always try to have those kind of numbers in your resume. It's completely fine even if you have, let's say, built integration tests, anything, just try to quantify it. That will always help. The third thing is you should always add hyperlinks to your work, especially if it's an open source work or if it's available online. So let's say if you have research papers, you just add your links to the research papers. If you have created some GitHub project, add the link for the GitHub project specifically. Even though you have a GitHub profile link at the top of your resume, you would still add the link to your GitHub project in that section. And the fourth word is the keywords. So if you are applying for specific roles, I think you should always tweak your resume a bit to match the job description for which you are applying. So for example, if the job description says like you'll be working on distributed systems, you should have that keyword in your resume somewhere. If you think if I've worked on that, you should add it. If you have not worked on it, I think it's still fine to add that keyword, but take that with a grain of salt, basically. The second thing, which is generally what most people struggle with, is like, how do I apply to this company? So basically, like, how do I get a call for the interview, right? So uh, that is one thing which a lot of people struggle, and that is what a lot of people ask me. The first and the best way is, and the most efficient way is referrals. So reach out to your friends on LinkedIn or through other social media if they're already working in those companies, and just say that, hey, I'm interested in this role, could you just refer me? Even if you don't have any friend, that is still fine. You can always reach out to other people in the company working there. Just ping them randomly. Even if you, let's say, ping 15, not all of them will reply you back. So even if one or two replies you back, that is still fine, because you just need one person to give you a referral, right? So that is the second way which you can do it. The second, the another way of applying or getting interviews for these companies is through recruiter reach outs. Like for example, in my case, like I had a recruiter from Google had contacted me for an interview, and that is how I landed the job actually. So these companies, all the big companies, always have a lot of recruiters or headhunters who are reaching out to the candidates on LinkedIn and asking them to interview. So for that, one thing which I definitely suggest is you should always keep your LinkedIn profile up to date. Add your resume on the LinkedIn, add other details of the current work which you're doing, your education details, add tags like C++, Python. If you can get recommendations, that is good. So if you have a good LinkedIn profile, that always helps for the recruiter to shortlist your profile, because she can just, or she or he can just go through that profile and just see, okay, this candidate has worked on C++, Python, and he or she looks like a good candidate for my next role. This third way is through coding competitions. Like if you have heard, like there are coding competitions which companies conduct, and they shortlist the candidates based on the performance on those coding competitions. Like for example, Google Code Jam, Kickstart. There are some examples, but if you just go on online programming websites, you'll always find some contests which are going, like HackerRank has sometimes. So that is another way. Like you can just participate in those competitions, and if you perform well, definitely there are chances of getting a call from that company. The fourth type is, like, there are always some career fair events. So for example, then seminars as well, like Grace Hopper conferences, some career fair events of companies. So these are the events where generally employees of many companies come together for a conferences, seminar events, and there are drop boxes where you can drop your resumes, or you can just interact with them and say that, hey, I'm interested, I'm currently working in, or I'm currently studying this, and I'm interested in your role in your company. So if you build your connections in those kinds of events, that definitely helps, and you can just land your next opportunity from there. And the last but not the least is the directly applying through careers website. So you say, okay, I've tried everything of the top four, but it's not working out for me. What should I do? You should then, in that case, directly apply from the careers website. And if the recruiter is like actively looking out through those applications, you definitely can get a call from it. I see a few questions. I think it was related to the resume. There's a question like, is it better to have a summary in a resume or not? Uh, I think it's better, but it should be very short and crisp if you can write it, like just one line or two. But generally, most of the resumes which I've seen, they don't have a summary. They just have the sections of education, current experience, and that. And the managers just go and directly look into the respective sections which they're looking out for. The second question is JavaScript not a relevant language for FAANG? It's not true. You can use JavaScript as well. Like I was recently chatting with a candidate who's like gave his interviews in JavaScript and it was accepted. So I think it's still fine. Don't worry about it. Good. Now let's say you got an interview, right? Your recruiter reached out to you and said, "Hey, we liked your profile, we liked your resume, would like to schedule an interview with you." Good. That's the thing. That's the first thing which you get, and that's a foot in the door, right? So before giving the actual interviews, what should you do? In my opinion, you should always have one or two mock interviews before any interview, or like before any interview of the company which you're applying for. The reason for that is you'll get like before any interview, right? You'll get to know how do you perform in actual interviews. So whether you're nervous, whether you're able to write the code in time, whether you're struggling with, let's say, explaining things, whether, or any other reason, right? So if you have a friend who is working already in that company, just ask him, hey, can I just schedule a session or schedule one event with you of, let's say, 30-35 minutes, and I'll just like to have a mock interview with you. I'm giving interviews for your company. If you can schedule a session with him, that's good. Always that person has already cleared the interview, right? So he knows what they actually look out in the interview. So that's the best thing. Uh, let's say even if you don't have any friend, there are a lot of online platforms like Pramp, Gainlow, Interview Buddy, Hey Coach, Interview Bit. all these platforms have a way through which you can mock interview. So you can just go on this platform, say like, and schedule a mock interview for you. The reason why I'm saying that it is really really helpful to understand what all things you are good at and what are things you need to improve. So before the actual interviews, these interviews are really helpful. I would definitely recommend that. Okay, so let's say you did your mock interviews and now you're actually in your interviews, right? So how should you approach an actual coding interview, or in a, I'll talk about system design also, but how should you approach, let's say, a coding interview? I think one of the major things is thinking out loud. Like all the companies, they try to understand how do you think. Uh, Irrespective of whether you're able to solve the problem or not, if they know how you think, they can still get a very good idea of how good you are. So even if you're not able to complete the question completely, or due to, let's say, time restrictions or anything, but if you are on the right path, if your thinking was right, I have seen my friends and all, they have got selected in those interviews as well. So anything which you're thinking, you just think out loud. Hey, I think I will use a map because we need a key and a value, or maybe I'll use a set because we just need distinct values. So anything which you're thinking, you should always think out loud. The second thing is, whenever some interviewer gives you a question, never jump into the solution. uh, the reason for that is, these questions are generally vague, and the vagueness is explicit because the interviewer wants to see whether you can ask the right clarifying questions. And it's actually useful when you're doing actual work as well, because in actual work, you'll never get the direct requirements. You'll always have a vague requirements, and you have to make a concrete implementation out of it. So whenever you see a question, ask clarifying questions, that what would be the range of numbers on which this code is running, or anything like that. So based on the question, like what kinds of inputs, whether the characters will be just, let's say, to Z, or whether it can be anything else. So this clarifying questions helps in two ways. The first, it gives the interviewer an idea that you are thinking out of the box. You're not just coming up with the finite solution or something. You know how to consider the edge case and ask clarifying questions. The second, it also helps you sometimes. Like, let's say, for example, the interviewer says, "Hey, assume it's let's say sorted list." So that gives you some idea. Okay, it's a sorted list. Or let's say the interviewer says, "Hey, it's going to be unique numbers." So that gives you a little bit idea of what data structure algorithm you should use. The second thing is, the third thing is, if once you have asked your clarifying questions, now you should trade off the approaches. So generally there are multiple approaches to solve a question. So let's say if you come up with a brute force way, you should immediately say to the interviewer, "Hey, I think the brute force way will be this by doing XYZ, and the time complexity will be ABC. That's, I know it's huge, but that is the brute force way, and let me try to think of to come up with an optimized way." So this tells the interviewer, okay, you know one solution to the problem, and you also know that it's not efficient. So it's basically an icing on the cake. So interviewer knows, okay, that now you're thinking of an optimized problem, optimized solution. So that helps you. And then you should trade off your approaches. Like some approaches you'll see this time complexity is better. Some approaches you'll see, let's say, the space complexity is better. So you should discuss that with the interview, that, well, I think of this approach, I can use it, but it will have XYZ time complexity, which is, I think, is more. The other approaches, I'll use this approach, but it will have ABC time space complexity, which I think. And you and the interviewer can then decide which approach you think would be fine, to which trade-off you think are okay to deal with. Coming to the next point is, always, like, when you start coding, once you have decided approach, you should always, at the start of the code, you should always consider edge cases. Like, what if the input is empty? What if, let's say, the input is null? Or what if the input is out of the range? So you should, irrespective of the other code, you should always consider edge cases. So I myself have taken around, let's say, more than 100 interviews at Google, and that was the first thing which I was looking at, and that is what the other interviewers look to. So you should always consider that first. The main algorithm can be later, but the first thing you should always check is for the edge cases. And the last thing, but not the least, again, it's how good do you code, and how do you follow your coding standards. Like, okay, you know the algorithm, but if you're writing the code in a haphazard way, you're not using proper variable names, uh, I'll tell you what happens is, generally what happens is, you have a coding interview with the interviewer, and the interviewer, let's say, has some meeting or something like that, and he goes to a meeting. Afterwards, when he has to give the feedback, he looks back at your code, and if the code is not well written, he doesn't remember anything which you have written. Even though you had written a correct code, if the interviewer does not understand later or during feedback sessions, he might think, okay, something is missing, or he might not understand what you did. Because generally, like, there are feedback sessions after, let's say, 1 week, 2 week, or even a month. Like this, interviews go a lot of, like, they run over a lot of period of time. So you should always write good, well commented code with proper variable names, so that even if the interviewer is looking at the code some point later, he understands what you have done. And even if not the current interviewer, but other interviewers are looking at the code, if they are understanding, that is also good. Then it helps you in that case too. uh, for some senior roles or like mid senior roles, some companies also have system design interviews. Like, the questions are generally like design Instagram, design WhatsApp, design YouTube. So basically what happens is, like, they want you to design some kind of a system or a complete system itself. uh, so the guidance there, or what I follow, is generally you should follow a predefined set of steps which you will be doing in your interview. The reason for that is, system design interviews are the interviews in which you lead. Like, you'll get very minimal hints from the interviewer, but this is the interview as if you are explaining your design to someone else. So this is the interview where you are leading the interview, right? So you should always have a predefined path or steps which you're going to follow in the interview. So the first thing, and that is the only thing in which you'll discuss or get more inputs from the interviewer, is understanding the requirements. So let's say the interviewer says, hey, I want you to design this system. So you should ask the question like, okay, what is this system doing? Who is going to use this system? In which regions? Or what are the, like, is it going to be used worldwide? What are the restrictions on its use? And also you should understand, like, the second point, as I mentioned, is the scale, like how many users are going to use the system. So that predefined information from the interview helps you to understand, okay, this is what the system is going to do, this is what the scale is going to look like. So the it helps you to trade off a few requirements. Like, okay, maybe I need, let's say it's a tickets booking system, right? So you need a consistency. Like, you can't give one seat to two people. uh, and so that is where you should always look at. Once you have the requirements, you should always consider of trading off. Like, you should discuss this with your interviewer that, okay, since this is this system, I think we can go a little bit less hard on, let's say, consistency, but we will have availability or something like that. So again, these are the things which you are going to lead, or which you are going to dictate. Generally, most of the times what I've seen is interviewers are just looking into how do you make your decisions. The next thing which I follow, or which you can also follow, is uh, okay, you have the requirements, let's say the scale and all. How are you going to design your storage? Whether it's going to be a NoSQL database, whether it's going to be a SQL database, which database would you choose? What would be the columns? How will the data interact with each other? These kind of things give a good idea to the interviewer as well. Like, okay, you have a good clarity on what information are you going to store. And the next thing is, once you have designed your storage, comes with the API design, or what we call as the high level design. You should not go in very detail right at the start. You should always come up with just a Lego blocks, right? Like, okay, service 1, service 2, service 3, show how will they interact with the database, and that's it. You should always just create a basic high level design. And then once the interviewer says, okay, this looks good, can we just now focus on, let's say, service 2, and what will it do? Then you can go in depth with the low level design and what all things the API will do it. Now, let's say you have done all of this hard work, right? And you have cracked your interview, so congrats on that. But is that it? Sadly, the answer is no. So whatever preparation you do in your coding interviews, in your system design interviews, it's at least in the coding part, is generally a little bit different from what you'll see at the bigger companies or the FAANG companies. The reason for that is, like, working at FAANG is generally a little bit different. There are a few things why it is so. The first thing is, the code which you used to write in your, let's say, competitive programming or in during the coding interviews, uh, and the code which you'll write in the companies, is the code in the company will has to focus on scale. Like, The code which you write is going to be executed, let's say, millions of times, right? So it will process millions of requests. So you should always focus on minor improvements, minor enhancements, performance optimizations. It's not going to be a code which is just going to run once. It is a code which runs on very high frequency. So you should all the code which you write in these companies is very, very efficient. It has to be very, very efficient. The second thing is, uh, generally what happens is you'll be writing code in multiple systems, or your code will be interacting with multiple systems, because generally, like now every most of the companies have moved to microservice architectures, and you'll always be interacting with a lot of services. So like working at FAANG gives you that good experience. Like you have to work with multiple systems and multiple teams as well. The third thing which I have observed in my experiences, the coding and the design standards are pretty high. So the reason for that is because these companies have evolved, or these companies have a very stable infrastructure, right? The reason why they have is because they have the code and design standards very high. Uh, s- uh, like for example, the diff reviews, the design reviews. Like I have seen, like most of the features, before even starting implementation, they always go through design reviews. They get discussed with the tech leads and other teams, and then the implementation is started. One more different thing which you will see, like in my experience working at FAANG is, most of the FAANG companies have internal tools for everything. Let it be a simple thing which you can just do it outside easily on open source, they'll still have internal tools for it. And so in a way it is good, as well as bad. The reason is, like, if you, since they're internal tools, you might just lose out on those things which are going outside the world, or in the outside world, outside your company. So even if you're working in FAANG, you should always look out for things which other people or other companies are using in the open source or in the outside world. Because once you change your new company, once you go back to other companies, you can't be reliable on internal tools which you have used before, right? And the fifth thing, which I have seen in my experiences of in working at FAANG companies, is you'll always have a good number of cross-functional collaboration, or you'll be working with multiple teams, with multiple tech leads, managers. So that is very good in my experience. The reason for that is helps improve your soft skills and leadership skills. So interaction with the people will make you sure that how do I get the work done. It's not only you who has to do the work. The other teams have to use what product you're creating, or you have to use the product which other teams are creating. So the interaction makes you, it improves your leadership as well as soft skills. And you might also mentor some other junior developers in the team to, so that also increases your leadership skills. So how should one, like how can one succeed in this FAANG companies, right? So generally I think one should focus on four things, and these are the four things which the company culture also looks at. Is the first thing is impact. That is the first basic thing. Is irrespective of the team, irrespective of your role, you should always see how can I create an impact uh, in the team. So impact can be anywhere. Like you can increase the revenue of the team, company. You can help to save the cost by doing some good things, or you can just, let's say, do other stuff which can have a good impact on the company or the team. The second thing is, okay, let's say you're having a good impact, but is that it? No. You should always have a high engineering excellence standards. Like for example, if there's some code which does not have a unit test or integration test, maybe you can write it. You can modify the code, refactor it, make it more optimized. The advantage of doing that is, well, if you start interacting a lot with the code in your team, it helps you to gain an understanding of the code, understand how things are working. And the third thing is, now you are the subject matter expert. So uh, automatically people will be dependent on you because you have changed the code, right? So basically you just get a one position high in your team because now you are the subject matter expert of the code base in your team. So that is one thing which I definitely recommend you should do. Like maybe reduce the on-call toil, improve the on-call health of the team and others. The third thing is focus on the people. So by people, what do I mean? So you should help uh, the junior engineers in your team to grow. Maybe to guide them how to select the project, which projects to select, how to unblock themselves. Let's say have mentoring sessions with them, and some other kinds of things. The reason for that is, once you start doing it, this helps you to, as I mentioned, like in the soft skills and leadership skills, but automatically it also gives you a like more and more people try to see you as their mentor, tech lead kind of a thing. So, or that improves your role in the team as well. And the last thing which you should focus on when you're working in FAANG companies is you should always focus on the vision. Okay, so can I have a vision for the team? What should my team do in the next 6 months, 1 year? So that where should it be? What work should it do? Once you start having this having a vision like that or a direction, you can always like broadcast it with your managers, tech leads, and other people, and that automatically, if the projects, let's say if the vision is good, if the projects make sense, then you're basically owning that vision or owning the vision of the team or the work of the team for the next 1 year. So that gives you a very good chance to succeed in your role and as well as in the team. So wrapping up, like what do we conclude from this session is there's only one thing which I would tell, and that's this. Uh, I think this is, if you can believe you can do it, you can definitely do it. That is what I have followed, and that is what it has worked for me, and I think it can work for you as well. A lot of people just don't apply, don't prepare, saying that hey, I have heard it's hard to get into these companies, the interviews are very tough. And my only suggestion is you just have to believe you can do it, and I think you can definitely do it. So these are the some resources which I have. I'll share the links as well. You can just go through this, as I said, but just select the resources which, or just select the medium which works best for you. So we'll open up for question and answers. I think there are a few questions already in the chat, so I just try to start answering them first. Why would you say it's hard to interview since current job is not related with SWE to get an interview? uh, I think if your job is currently not related to SWE, that is, it might be difficult to get an interview, but you can just work on it. You can just do some, let's say, programming competitions or do some projects through, let's say, Coursera or something like that, LinkedIn Learnings. If you do the projects, you can just add those in your resume and say, okay, this is what I've done, and if you can just publish it. I think people do look at those projects, and you can then get your resume shortlisted. Um, this, I think that's a follow-up question, like do you have any recommendation for projects? Yes. So for example, let's say you currently want to work in ML field, as an ML engineer or something like that. You can just start doing projects, let's say by picking up, like for example, there's an open source GitHub community for, let's say, a specific ML project. You reach out to them, pick a feature request. There are always feature requests or bugs which they want to fix. Pick it up, fix it, send out a pull request, and once you're done, you can just say add that in your resume. Hey, I added a new feature of ML feature in this XYZ project. I think like there are also websites like Kaggle and all where you can participate in competitions, and you can contribute to a, or you can win there. Uh, Coming to the next question is, can you comment on the current job market and when the company will start hiring again? uh, I think I understand, yeah, the current job market is a bit slow, but one thing which I know for sure is like once it opens up, it will definitely open up in good numbers, because like from what I've been hearing from my manager at Google, Meta, Amazon, is like they wanted to hire a lot of people this year itself, but they couldn't because of the economy. But next year they'll definitely try to hire a lot. So I can't predict the exact, but I guess like maybe sometime after Q1, it's definitely going to open up a lot. Um, yeah, I think this is a good question. Like generally speaking, about how many questions in lead code would be good enough prep for us in problem solving for FAANG interviews. Uh, I get a lot of people ask me that, and I'll say there's no fixed number. You can, what you should do is you should try questions of different topics, some of the topics which I mentioned before in the presentation slides. And once you feel you're comfortable in those topics, or questions of those topics, I think you're in a good spot. Some people try to solve like 600, 700 questions, and uh, I don't know if that works out for them, but I don't think that's necessary. I think you should just solve X number of questions where X is you feel comfortable. Okay, like if someone asks me on a question on linked list, I can solve it. I think that's it. Sorry if the presentation, I just presented again. Coming to the next question, for cracking any FAANG interview at FAANG, does score, number of questions solved, or lead code or any other coding platform matter? No, the answer is no. No one is going to take a look at how many questions you have solved on lead code or any coding platform, and solving large number of questions does not necessarily mean that you're getting good at that. What you should try to do is you should time frame the questions which you're solving. That okay, generally what I've seen is the interviews are 45 minutes and you have to solve either one or two questions. So if you're trying to solve two questions in 45 minutes, right, that basically means 20 minutes for each question and 5 minutes for the other introduction and stuff. So you should always, when you're solving questions on lead code, you should try to see if you can solve those questions in 20 minutes over the period of time. If you can do it consistently for all the topics, I think you should, that should be good enough, irrespective of the number of questions which you're solving. Coming to the next question, for are there any specific things you should know or consider when negotiating with FAANG companies, and can you recommend any sources for that? Yes, I think definitely you should. There are a few things which you should consider. Uh, the first thing is what comes in top of my mind is how good were you in the interviews. So if you had if you had cracked all the interviews properly, if there were none of them which you think didn't go well, I think you are already at the good. You have already have a good hand in negotiating. The second thing is there are some platforms like Blind, I think levels.fi and others, which give you an idea of how much does a company pay for a particular role. So you should always go through those platforms and see, like, for your experience, for your level on which you're getting hired, what was the compensation which the company offered. If you see that you're getting paid low, you should come up with a good estimate and reach out to the recruiter saying that, hey, I think based on my research or anything, I think this is what I'm looking for. And one more thing which I think you should also look out is the role, like how many people, like generally you can ask, let's say if you have some internal friends, you should ask them like, okay, for this role, how much does the company pay? And so even if you don't get the data points for it on, let's say, Blind or anywhere else. There's a next question is, what about the level of questions we need to take and solve on lead code regarding each topic you have shown in the PPT? I think that's again a good question. So you should start with easy questions on those topics, and once you think, okay, like easy is okay, I can do it in 20 minutes, I can most of the times it's correct, it's working for me, then you should go to medium questions, and then start with mostly with the medium questions. From my experience, what I've seen is it's the hard questions are generally rare in the interviews, like 5% or 10% of the times the hard questions get asked, but most of the times it's going to be medium questions itself. So I think focus should be on medium questions, and if you have time before your interviews, then you should do some hard questions as well. Then the next question is there any opportunities for Africa at FAANG? The answer is definitely yes. So I myself have a few colleagues at my current companies, and these companies are very, very like neutral to any kinds of bias. So there is a chance for everyone in these companies. Is asking for too low of a salary a red flag? Uh, I don't know if I got the question correct, but I think the recruiter is always on your side, so you should always think of that. You should always keep that in mind. So you should be as open as possible with the recruiter to see like what numbers are you thinking and what the company is paying. Um, And coming to the next question is it okay not to have a very first intuition to solve a particular question? And further, whenever similar question arrives, recall the previous question of the same type. Yes, definitely. Like when you start practicing, it's not going to be the case like you'll always have a first intuition of the problems. So you'll get the intuitions as and when you progress and as you go progressing ahead, practicing ahead. So it's completely fine if you don't get an intuition. Try for 15-20 minutes. If you can't think of anything else, try to see if you can get some hints. Like HackerRank, for example, has multiple hints, like first hint, second hint, And even after, let's say, first or second hint or third hint, you're not able to do it, then go and see the solution which the authors have written, and that is completely fine. You'll like get well as when you progress. What's your LinkedIn? Do we have any more events like this? Do you have a link for the recording? Where can I find the resume template? Yes, I'll just share my. You can find my LinkedIn and the link to this PPT in the code Codementor event details. I have commented in the discussion. I'll also post a link for the same at the end of this session. And yes, I'm planning definitely more sessions like this. So just feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Coming to the next question is, if you don't make it the first time, when is the best time to apply again? Are they keep data of my first application? Do they care if I'm trying again and again for the first time? So yes, generally the convention is, if you didn't clear the phone screen interview, you can apply again in 6 months. If you didn't clear, let's say, the main round of interviews, you can apply again after 1 year. Uh, and So that is the general convention, but basically you can just always have a chat with the recruiters to see if some recruiters make it 10 months for some candidates because they, let's say, it just missed by a whisker or something, and that is still fine. And this is not again true for all companies. It depends from company to company. Mm. There are a few questions based on the resources. I'm not sure if I can share in the chat, but I'll share. I have those in the PPT. I'll share the link in the PPT link in the chat. There's a question like, along with job and family with kids, how to prepare. Uh, I can I can answer that. Most all the interviews which I've given, like I've prepared for them along with my current job. Uh, what I used to do is like, you set out some time, let's say per day, 1 hour or 2 hour. It's not a fixing. It's one thing which you should consistently follow. Okay, 1 hour is also fine, but set it up. In this 1 hour, practice regularly. Like be consistent in it. Try to see if you can get some more time during the weekends, and basically that is how you can just try to focus on it along with your other commitments. Is there a wait time for all FAANG companies? Yeah, generally yes, there is a wait time for the FAANG companies, and but it depends from company to company. Again, there was also a question whether they keep a track of the applications. The answer is yes, they keep a track. The reason for that is not because like they just basically, if let's say you didn't clear the interviews but they are hiring again, the recruiters generally try to see which candidates missed it last time, and they try to reach out to the candidates again. The next question is, what interview looks for in a system design interview in 30 minutes for a few companies? I think for only one major thing which any interview looks at is how clear are you with your design. Is Do you have a clarity on your design? There's no right or wrong design. There's always trade-offs, and that is fine. But how clear are you in your approach, in your thinking, in your, let's say, design of the database, the services, etc. Basically, you should know that, okay, this service is going to this database will do this, and how clear you are on that. I think that is the main thing which everyone looks like. And then other things come, like whether it will work at scale, whether it will work if, let's say, the request increase, or on that cases. Coming to the next, does timing and solving the code matter during an interview? If yes, how fast should we solve the problem? Yes, timing does definitely matter. So uh, you should generally have a good idea that, okay, the interview is 45 minutes. Is the interview going like, if the interview is asking a question, generally the set is like you should solve it in around 20 minutes, and that is what I suggest. Like around 20 minutes you should be able to solve the questions. And even if you're not able to do it, that is still fine. Sometimes, like, there are cases where the code is huge, so I think the interviewers understand that as well, so they always have some flexibility with that. Okay, the code was large, so that's why the candidate could not complete it. But if your approach is good, if your algorithm is good, they consider that as well. Like in one of my interviews, interviewer had just asked, okay, you can't complete the code, just at the last write the pseudo code of what were you thinking you'll do it, and that was still fine. Mm. There's a question. I'm currently in my third year. I don't have any coding background. Is it too late to start coding? And what should I do to prepare for placement in 7 months? It's definitely not too late. I have seen my friends who had backgrounds in mechanical engineering, others, and they still currently are working at Meta with me. So uh, even if you don't have a coding background, that is still fine. You can just start somewhere, and I think you can still do it. Does a CDAC degree helps to get hired in FAANG companies? Unfortunately, I think I don't have a good understanding of that, so I'll skip that. Are there ways to prepare for technical interview questions that aren't coding exercises? I've gotten interviews, but the technical questions have seemed really varied. Yes, I think even if like you don't want to solve coding exercises, you can. Uh, there's one way which I would say this is pair programming. Like you can pair program with another person, and that is one way like you can prepare for the technical interview questions. There's a question like, what is the expectation during an interview for a senior level 16 years of experience? Um, I think expectation you should first see like which job the profile are you trying to apply. What does the include? Does it is it a, let's say, senior engineer? Is it a tech lead, or is it an IC role? What kind of role is it? Uh, and then once that is done, I think then you should see, okay, let's say if it's a tech lead, for example, though, then you can chat with the recruiter. Again, as I said, like recruiter is the person you should think is on your side, because that person also wants you to get hired. So you should discuss with what are my responsibilities going to be, whether I'll be leading a team, whether I'll be as IC, or what will be the case. And based on that, you should decide, okay, the expectations, whether it's design, whether it's coding, whether it's a mix of both, whether it's people management. That is what then you can decide on that. I actually missed a few questions in the Q&A section, so I'll move there. There's a question. You mentioned lead code being accurate for Meta interviews. Which other companies is it accurate for? It was quite accurate for Google as well. Like one of the interview questions which I had in my Google interview was the one which I had practiced on lead code. So generally, it's pretty accurate, I would say. Uh, but again, like one thing which you should see is like now there are more than like I guess 300, 400 questions. So I maybe you'll be able to practice it all of them, maybe you'll not, but it's not going to be that if you, let's say, practice all the questions, that interviews will always have only those questions. So there might be still questions which were not in lead code, because generally what I've seen is companies like Google, Facebook, they have a internal uh, auditing process where if the question comes on lead code, they try to ban it from the question bank. So if it's banned from the question bank, then most probably the other interviews will not ask it later. So there's a lag between, so that is the time where you get lucky, but they still keep auditing it. Do you have some advice for managing interviews, study time, project building, and networking? I feel like something is always slipping through the cracks. That is a good question. So what I would suggest is, you should, instead of doing all of these things at once, you should always pick up one thing at a time. Like for example, uh, just focus on your interview preparation right now. Project building and, let's say, networking, you can focus on later. So always focus on one thing at a time. Let's say for a month you'll just focus on the interview prep. Once you think, okay, I've got a good of that, maybe then you can reduce it to 60% of your time or 40% of your time, and do something else in the rest 60% of your time, where the free time which you get. If the LinkedIn account is not a premium account, it's a simple account. Can we handle it out? How can we reach the recruiters? How to handle big data networking? Um, Good point. So I understand it's not premium. So what I did is, like, I just took a free 1 month LinkedIn premium trial, and I did most of my networking at that time. So as I said in my previous question, you should focus on one thing at a time. So if you, let's say, are focusing on building a network, take the premium for 1 month, build your network at that 1 month, and hopefully that helps. um, I'm currently pursuing a BTech degree, so wanted to know what are the key features for an undergraduate to make his her CV stand out. Also, the importance of projects in the CV. I think that's a good question, which is applicable to a lot of them. So the first thing is, you should have good projects in your resume CV. So the projects which I mean are the college projects. If let's say you can the projects which you're currently doing as part of your subjects which you have in your course. Even if you don't have good projects in that, just a lot of people do, let's say, a sentiment analysis project or anything like that. Just they just go to GitHub or somewhere, pick up a project, do some minor changes or something like that, and or even if you're, let's say, doing a course on LinkedIn, most of the courses on LinkedIn have some projects inside them. You have to build something, so you can do the course on LinkedIn or any other website, and once you're done with that project, you add that in your resume. So projects are definitely helpful. A second thing is, if you can get an internship, that is another beneficial point. uh, if you're getting a paid internship, it's very good, but let's say if you're not getting a paid internship, if you have to settle down, I think you can settle down for unpaid internship as well. So in college, what matters is something on your resume, or so like an experience. So I had did the same thing. If you don't get a paid internship, if you're getting unpaid, that is still fine. There are few platforms where you can just contribute, like Geeks for Geeks or anything. You can just reach out on them, contribute a few pieces of code and blogs, and you can just add that on your resume saying that, hey, I've worked with Geeks for Geeks in my summertime or something. Can you yeah, I think one that is there. I think one more question is, can you please recommend pages to practice coding exercises for these interviews? I think the ones which are suggested in the PPT, like HackerRank, CodeChef, Codeforces, LeetCode, these are really good. Uh, Coming to the next question, does age matter for the roles? The answer is no. So this all these companies have roles, and the people working in these roles, the roles are only 7-8, or the levels are only 7-8, and people of all age groups work in these levels. So age does not matter for any of the roles. You should not never worry about that. Is degree a requirement? Because I see most of the people profiles on LinkedIn, working at FAANG company, have a degree. The answer is no. I have seen people who don't have a computer science degree, who have, let's say, a degree in arts or something else, and they are still working in FAANG companies. The reason is, you just start with building something small, getting into just starting a coding, getting into a, let's say, even if you don't get to a FAANG company, get into some IT or software company, uh, get some experience in that field, and then apply it to your FAANG company. So if you have a good experience, if you have a good resume, degree is the one thing which the recruiters don't look out for. And most of the interviews in FAANG companies, they don't look at your resume that much. The resume is used only for at the start when the recruiter is screening. But after that, it's just how well you perform in those coding and system design interviews. I think this is the last question. Does Meta hire remotes for different countries, locations where there's no Meta offices? The answer is yes. Like, I have working with a few colleagues who are located in the European countries where Meta office is not there. And yes, so Meta does hire for remote roles, and not only Meta, like a lot of companies do hire for remote roles these days after COVID, and that is completely a new norm now. Yes, I guess that is it. So thanks a lot, folks, for attending today's session. Hopefully, this was helpful for you all. These are some links of my LinkedIn and GitHub. I understand this might every one of you, each one of you, have different circumstances. So I also have one-to-one mentoring sessions where I discuss in depth with the current scenarios. So feel free to schedule out some sessions with me on that as well. I do that in my free time, so I have opened up for a few slots for that for the next week. Yeah, yes, that's a free session. It's part of the community work, so it's anyone can register for it. Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. I'll just post the links here as well. Just give me a minute. And in case you want a link for the presentation, thank you all. If there's anything, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Nice talking to all of you. Thanks a lot.